real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Strange creature in my house. Dear Scary Stories NYC. The first time I saw the Dogman, I gasped so hard I almost choked. Besides being the most unexpected sight of my life, it was also the most memorable. This was a stunning creature, something that seemed impossible and yet was gorgeously real. It was as large as a bear, maybe larger, standing up on its hind legs. The look of surprise on its face was almost comical. It seemed as alarmed by my presence as I was by its, even though the big gray beast man was twice my size, or nearly so. I lost my husband at a young age and have lived alone in a cottage in the woods ever since. I never really got very close with any of my neighbors, who are not located very nearby anyway. And so when I started noticing the Dogman, I started speaking to him as though he were my friend, or at least as though he were my dog or my pet. He seemed interested in whatever I had to say, and so I kept talking to him. I was bringing meat snacks with me to begin to train him to behave around me. He would eat whatever I'd offer, he'd listen to me talk to him, and then he'd disappear. After some time, he began to follow me home, but never inside my house. He would stay in or near my backyard area, and then he would go off on his own, presumably to hunt. I never bought him dog food, like canned food, but I would share the meat I ate myself with him. Looking back now, I realize how naturally our routines developed. Every morning around 8, I'd step out to my back porch with my coffee and a handful of leftover chicken or beef from last night's dinner. He'd emerge from the tree line like clockwork, with his intelligent amber eyes focused entirely on me. Not on the meat. On me. "Good morning, beautiful," I'd say, and I swear his ears would perk up at the sound of my voice. He'd approach with careful, measured steps. When he took the food from my hand, his touch was impossibly gentle for such enormous paws. The conversations usually started simply. "Chilly this morning, isn't it?" Or "Looks like rain coming." But as weeks turned to months, I found myself telling him everything. About the grocery store clerk who always forgot to double bag my items. About the book I was reading. About how quiet the house felt, without my husband's laugh echoing through the rooms. And the Dogman never interrupted. He never judged. He'd sit on his haunches, towering over me even then, and listen with an attention that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. Sometimes he'd tilt his head at certain words and I would laugh. "Well, you understand that, do you?" By the end of that first year, our boundaries were clearly established. The property line seemed to be his limit. He'd follow me to the edge of the yard, but usually never cross onto the porch itself. When visitors came, rare as they were, he'd vanish completely, leaving me wondering if I had imagined the entire thing. But he always returned. Through thunderstorms and snowfall, through my bouts of grief and my moments of unexpected joy, the Dogman was constant. My wild, impossible friend, who existed in that space between reality and fairy tale. By year 5, I'd become something of an amateur cryptozoologist. I had set up a small notebook on my kitchen table, where I would record observations about my mysterious companion. Height, approximately 7 feet, which kept growing. Weight, maybe 300 pounds, which kept growing. Coat, thick and gray with silver highlights that seemed to increase each year. Eyes amber, remarkably expressive. Intelligence off the charts for what should be a wild animal. "I've been thinking about what you are," I told him one crisp October morning, pulling my cardigan tighter as I settled onto my porch chair. He was lounging in his favorite spot, a sunny patch where my vegetable garden met the forest edge. "I have a theory," I told him. His head lifted, and those eyes fixed on me with an intensity that still took my breath away after all those years. "I think you're what happens when wolves and Sasquatches have babies," I said. And I said it with the confidence of someone who had spent months researching cryptid sightings online. "It makes perfect sense, really," I told him. "The intelligence of a Sasquatch, the pack loyalty of a wolf, but the size and the strength of both. That's my theory. You're a hybrid." He made a sound, Not quite a growl and not quite a chuff. I had learned to interpret his various vocalizations over the years. This one seemed almost, amused? Well, think about it, I continued, warming to my theory. Sasquatches are clearly highly intelligent, probably as smart as humans or smarter. But wolves understand pack dynamics, loyalty, companionship. You got the best of both worlds. I paused to sip my coffee. Plus, it would explain why you're the only one of your kind I've ever seen. Mixed breeds are rare in the wild. As the years progressed, my theories became more elaborate. I had read about indigenous legends, about shapeshifters and forest guardians. I had studied his behavior patterns and cross-referenced them with wildlife biology texts. He seemed genuinely interested in my research, leaning forward when I'd pull out books with pictures, following my finger when I would point to anatomical diagrams. You see this, I'd show him illustrations of wolf pack hierarchies. You definitely have alpha characteristics, but you're not territorial in the way a true alpha would be. You're more, diplomatic. The seasons cycled, and we both showed signs of aging. My hair, once honey blonde, developed silver streaks that caught the morning light. His coat grew more distinguished, the gray giving way to patches of pure silver that made him look like a distinguished gentleman of the forest. Do you ever get lonely? I asked him one snowy February afternoon during his 8th year of visits. He'd started staying closer to the house during harsh weather, and I'd taken to leaving a thick blanket on the porch furniture for him. He was lying on that blanket now, looking every inch the oversized dog, despite his impossible nature. Snow dusted his fur, making him look like something from a winter fairy tale. I asked him again, do you ever get lonely? I mean really lonely. Not just missing company, but that deep down feeling that maybe you're the only one of your kind. Besides, I think that's what you are. The only one. At least the only one around here. His ears twitched, and he lifted his massive head to study my face. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About being unique. About being alone. I've been having one of my melancholy weeks, missing my late husband more acutely than usual. Sometimes I wonder if that's why we found each other. Two lonely souls in the middle of nowhere. I told him about my husband that afternoon. Really told him, not just the surface memories that I'd shared before. About how we'd met at a bookstore, both reaching for the same copy of Where the Crawdads Sing. About his terrible jokes and his gentle hands. About the illness that took him before we'd had enough time together. You would have liked him, I said, and I meant it. He was kind to strays, too. The Dogman, I had started thinking of him with a capital D like a proper name, rose from his blankets and moved closer to the porch steps. He sat there, just within arm's reach if I'd been brave enough to try, and he made a soft rumbling sound in his chest. It was not quite a growl. It was something entirely his own. You're a good listener, you know that? I smiled through my tears. Better than most humans I've known. Over the years, I shared everything with that Dogman. My worries about aging alone. My small victories in the garden. My theories about everything from local politics to the meaning of life. He absorbed it all with that remarkable attention, occasionally responding with head tilts, soft vocalizations, or changes in posture that seemed almost too appropriate to be coincidental. Sometimes I catch myself thinking he understood more than he should. The way he'd nod when I'd mention specific people or places. The way he'd become agitated when I'd talk about being sick or hurt. The way he'd seem to almost smile. Really smile when I would share good news. But I'd always dismissed these thoughts as the wishful thinking of a lonely woman who'd grown too attached to her wild friend. By the time we'd been companions for 15 years, something fundamental had shifted between us. The novelty had worn off, replaced by something deeper and more precious. Genuine companionship. He was no longer a fascinating mystery to be studied. He was simply part of my life, as essential as my morning coffee or evening news. My hair had gone fully silver, and I'd started wearing it in a practical bun that stayed put during my garden work. His coat had followed suit. The distinguished gray now shot through with streaks of pure white that caught the sunlight like spun silver. We were aging together, two old friends growing comfortable in each other's presence. "Look at us," I said one morning as I settled into my porch chair, the same chair I'd been using for decades, now softened with cushions from my aging bones. "A couple of silver foxes, that's you and me. Foxes enjoying the sunrise." He was in his usual spot, but closer now than he'd ever dared in his early years. Close enough that I could see the individual whiskers on his muzzle, the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. Close enough that his presence felt less like a wild encounter and more like, well, like having a friend over for coffee. My theories had evolved over the years, becoming more elaborate and, I'll admit, more personal. "I've been reading about hybrid vigor," I told him one afternoon, spreading my research papers across the porch table. "That's when crossbreeding creates offspring that are stronger and more adaptable than either parent species." He lifted his head from his paws, giving me that look of patient attention that I had come to cherish. "That's what you are, isn't it?" I asked him. "Not just a Sasquatch-wolf hybrid, but the best possible version of both. The intelligence to survive alone, the loyalty to maintain friendships, the adaptability to bridge two worlds." I paused, struck by my own words. "You're not caught between two natures. You are the perfect combination of two natures." Sometimes I would test my theories by asking him direct questions. "If I'm right about your wolf heritage, you should understand pack dynamics. Do you see me as part of your pack?" His response was always the same, a soft chuff and a steady gaze that seemed almost fond. "Well, I think you do," I'd conclude, unreasonably pleased by this one-sided confirmation. The older we got, the more I noticed things that didn't quite fit my carefully constructed theories. Little moments that seemed to suggest something more complex than I had initially imagined. By the time I'd fallen in my garden and twisted my ankle, I'd been lying there cursing my clumsiness and trying to decide whether the pain was worth calling for help, when he appeared at the garden gate. Not his usual casual approach, but an urgent, purposeful movement that brought him closer to human civilization than I had ever seen him venture. He stood there, clearly agitated, making soft whining sounds until I called out, "I'm okay, I'm just clumsy." Only then had he retreated to his usual distance, although he'd watched me limp into the house with an intensity that felt almost human in its concern. Or the way he'd react when I'd mentioned specific names or places. I had tested this accidentally at first, and then more deliberately, as I'd noticed this pattern. I mentioned my sister Sarah, and his ears would perk up in recognition. I had talked about her dozens of times over the years, mentioned the hardware store in town, and he'd tilt his head in that thoughtful way. But mention a random place or a place I'd never discussed before, and he would show no reaction at all. "You're keeping track, aren't you?" I asked him once, marveling at what seemed like an impossible level of comprehension. "All these years of my rambling, and I think you're actually cataloging it all." His response had been that soft rumbling sound he made when he was pleased, the sound I'd come to think of as his version of chuckling. The most unsettling moments were when he'd seem to anticipate my needs. I'd step out to the porch feeling under the weather, and he'd already be in the sunny spot closer to the house, as if he knew I needed the comfort of his nearby presence. I'd come outside upset about something, a difficult phone call with my sister, a bill I couldn't afford, news that reminded me how alone I was, and he'd be waiting with that patient, understanding expression that seemed to say, "Tell me everything." "I'm just projecting," I tell him firmly. "I'm a lonely old woman who's gotten too attached to a wild animal. I'm seeing what I want to see." But sometimes in the quiet moments, when he'd settle into his favorite spot and I'd settle into mine, when that afternoon light would slant through the trees just so, and the world would feel perfectly peaceful, I would allow myself to wonder, what if he really did understand? What if all these years of one-sided conversation had actually been something more? The thought both excited and terrified me, because if he truly understood everything I had shared, every grief, every joy, every rambling theory about his nature and origin, then I had been far less alone than I had ever imagined. And if I'd been wrong about that, what else might I have been wrong about too? But those were dangerous thoughts for a practical woman to entertain. So I pushed them aside and returned to my comfortable theories about hybrid vigor and forest genetics, to the safe assumption that I was simply an old woman who had found companionship with a remarkable but ultimately wild creature. It was easier that way. It was safer. At least, it was until everything changed. It happened in late September, 40 years to the month since our first encounter. I was in my usual spot rambling about my latest theory, something about seasonal coat changes indicating Arctic wolf ancestry, when the air around him began to shimmer. You see, the way your fur thickens suggests genetic memory from... But those words died in my throat. His massive frame was contracting, reshaping itself with elasticity that defied everything I understood about biology. His fur receded like morning mist, revealing pale human skin. His claws became fingers. That noble muzzle shortened into a weathered but kind human face. Within moments, a gray-haired man sat where my Dogman had been, naked and shivering slightly in the autumn air. "Hello, Margaret," he said. And his voice was exactly what I'd always imagined it would be. Gentle, warm, familiar, despite being heard for the first time. My coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the porch boards. "I'm sorry," he continued, pulling his knees to his chest for modesty. "I should have told you decades ago, but..." He gestured helplessly. "You had such beautiful theories. I didn't want to disappoint you by not being a dogman, by being something as ordinary as just what I am. A werewolf." The word werewolf felt foreign on my tongue, but I tried saying it anyway. He told me he was cursed in his 20s, not really very long before we met. "I've been living between worlds ever since," he said. "Human by birth, but usually living more as a wolf by nature. You know how I've lived, you know me better than anybody." At that point, I wasn't sure who he was any longer, and I wasn't sure I liked the way this had all gone. I felt lied to. I felt used. I felt like he'd been laughing at me behind my back for literally 40 years. His amber eyes, unchanged despite everything else, met mine. "You were never talking to a pet, Margaret. You were talking to me. Every word, every story, every theory about Sasquatch-wolf hybrids. I heard all of it." The weight of 40 years of one-sided conversations crashed over me. Every embarrassing admission, every moment of grief shared in supposed solitude, every time I'd called him beautiful, or told him I loved him like family. "Why did you have to admit it now?" He smiled, but he smiled sadly. "Because, Margaret, because we're both getting old, and I'm tired of being cold. I'm tired of pretending I don't understand when you ask if I'm lonely. I was hoping maybe it was time to come in from the woods." I left for my sister Sarah's the next morning, my head spinning with feelings of betrayal and wonder in equal measure. 2 weeks of my sister's practical sympathy helped me process the impossible. My wild friend was human. He had always been human. But returning home in October's first cold snap, I found him waiting in the backyard, human now, shivering in clothes that looked borrowed from decades past. The sight of him looking so vulnerable, but still so hopeful, dissolved my remaining anger. "Would you like to come inside?" I asked. "It's getting cold." His face lit up like sunrise. "I'd like that very much. 40 years of friendship doesn't disappear because of one revelation. If anything, learning that he'd chosen to listen to my rambling theories with such patience made me like him even more. We're housemates now, 2 aging friends grateful for companionship in our final chapters. Mostly we dodder about the house together, but I find he's a great help on shopping expeditions. He also cleans up pretty nicely, and is surprisingly well behaved in restaurants for a guy who lived the last half-century in mud and trees. The best relationships I've discovered survive even the most shocking truths. Sometimes they're even stronger for them.
Team Dogman is back, embroidered classic black. Team Dogman, embroidered hat, it's the hat, that's where it's at.
It went away, but now it's returned. The hat that tells the world you're on Team Dogman. Order yours now. Link is in the description. Warning, wearing a Team Dogman hat does not ensure that Dogman will eat you.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.